The courtroom was buzzing with its usual noise. People shuffled papers, whispered quietly to each other, and glanced nervously at the judge's bench. It was a small courtroom, but the atmosphere felt heavy, as if the air itself held the tension of every case that had ever passed through it. The judge sat high on the bench, a stern figure in robes, looking down at the room with a sharp gaze that seemed to pierce right through anyone who dared step forward. He was used to commanding respect, and he expected obedience, not challenge. Into this environment walked a teenager, young-looking and slender, carrying a worn briefcase. His steps were quiet but purposeful. Everyone in the room noticed him immediately, not because of any loud entrance, but because he seemed out of place. The uniformed officers, the seasoned attorneys, even the jury members, all looked at him and shared unspoken thoughts. What was a boy doing here in this serious courtroom? He had the kind of face that belonged in a school photograph, not in a courtroom where legal battles were fought every day. He approached the bench calmly, his eyes steady and focused. The judge glanced down at him, raised an eyebrow, and a smirk formed on his lips. The judge had seen many inexperienced people attempt to speak in court, and he knew how to make them squirm. But this boy, he seemed like the easiest target he could find. "Well, well," the judge said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "And what do we have here? A very young visitor, I presume? Are you lost? Or do you think you can actually contribute to this case?" The boy did not flinch. He stood tall, even if his height didn't quite match the authority of the room. He opened his briefcase slowly, as if savoring the moment, and took out a small stack of papers. He placed them carefully on the table before him, then looked directly at the judge with a calm, unwavering gaze. "Your Honor," he said, his voice steady and clear, "I am here to present evidence and argument on this case. I request that you allow me to speak." The judge laughed softly, shaking his head. "You present evidence? At your age? You're barely old enough to drive, let alone practice law. This is almost amusing." "Very well, go ahead, but don't waste the court's time." A few people in the courtroom chuckled quietly, sharing the judge's amusement. The teen, however, did not let the laughter distract him. He took a deep breath and began to organize his papers, ready to speak. There was a strange quiet that fell over the room, as if everyone was holding their breath, curious to see what would happen next. As he spoke, he started with the basics, laying out the facts of the case clearly and methodically. His words were simple, but they were precise, and they were organized in a way that even the most distracted listener could follow. He did not use fancy words to impress anyone. He simply explained what he knew and what he had found, as if speaking to a friend rather than a room full of strangers. But there was a rhythm to his speech, a confidence that could not be ignored. The judge leaned back slightly, still smirking, but there was a flicker of curiosity in his eyes. He had heard confident arguments before, but there was something different about this boy. He didn't stumble, he didn't falter, and he certainly didn't seem intimidated by the mockery he had received. The judge found himself wondering, for the first time in a long while, whether he had misjudged someone entirely based on appearance. The courtroom itself began to change. The whispering stopped, and all eyes focused on the teenager. Even the seasoned attorneys who had seen hundreds of cases leaned slightly forward, trying to catch every word. The boy explained the sequence of events clearly, pointing out inconsistencies in the testimony and highlighting facts that had been overlooked. He spoke calmly, without anger or arrogance, but with a firmness that commanded attention. Despite the judge's attempts to interject, the teenager listened carefully and responded politely, yet firmly. Every time the judge interrupted with a sarcastic comment, the boy acknowledged it and turned it into an opportunity to clarify his point further. It was almost as if he had anticipated the ridicule and had prepared himself not just to answer it, but to use it to strengthen his argument. The judge frowned, leaning forward slightly. He was no stranger to clever legal minds, but there was a sharpness in this boy's reasoning that he could not easily dismiss. It was as though the teenager had an invisible map of the courtroom, knowing exactly when to speak, when to pause, and how to deliver each point with maximum impact. The judge's smirk began to fade, replaced by a mix of surprise and unease. The teen continued, breaking down the case point by point. He referenced specific laws and precedents, using them to support his argument without sounding boastful or unnatural. It was not about showing off knowledge. It was about presenting the truth, and he did it in a way that made sense to everyone in the room. The jury members leaned forward in their seats, eyes wide with interest, and even the court reporter seemed momentarily distracted by the clarity and flow of his speech. There was a moment when the judge attempted to cut him off again, a subtle attempt to regain control. The teenager, however, met the interruption with calm composure. "With respect, Your Honor," he said, "I believe this point is directly relevant to understanding the case fully. May I continue?" The courtroom fell silent. Even the judge, momentarily taken aback, nodded. There was no anger in the teen's voice, only respect and confidence. That combination was disarming, and it caused the judge to hesitate longer than usual, something that did not happen often. The young boy had turned what should have been a humiliating moment into a display of calm authority. As he went on, the teenager started to notice small details that others had overlooked. A misplaced fact here, a vague statement there, all of which could influence the outcome of the case. He pointed them out carefully, backing each observation with reason and evidence. The courtroom atmosphere shifted. Where there had been mockery and doubt, now there was attention and curiosity. The judge's expression grew more complex. He still carried the authority of the courtroom, but there was a hint of uncertainty creeping in. He had underestimated this young-looking boy, and the realization was uncomfortable. He had thought he was in control, that this would be an amusing interruption. But the boy was not only holding his own, he was challenging the very assumptions the judge had made. Throughout all of this, the teenager never raised his voice, never argued disrespectfully, and never let the laughter or skepticism of others sway him. He was focused, methodical, and completely in control of his words and demeanor. It was a rare combination, one that even seasoned attorneys struggled to maintain under pressure. By the time he paused to gather his thoughts, the courtroom was fully attentive. People were no longer whispering. The entire room seemed to be waiting for his next words. The judge leaned forward, resting his elbows on the bench, watching the boy carefully. There was an unspoken recognition that something extraordinary was happening before his eyes. The teenager took a slow breath and began to outline the next part of his argument. He carefully explained how certain evidence should be interpreted, why some testimonies were inconsistent, and how these points affected the overall case. He did this with clarity and precision, but also with a calmness that suggested he was completely at ease with the challenge before him. As he spoke, the judge found himself involuntarily impressed. He had seen many confident speakers, but few who could combine logic, respect, and composure in such a balanced way. The boy's appearance no longer mattered. What mattered was the intelligence and skill he displayed. The courtroom, too, was noticing, and whispers of surprise and admiration began to circulate quietly among the attendees. The teen concluded his points with a simple, yet powerful statement. He did not demand recognition or praise. Instead, he presented the facts and allowed them to speak for themselves. The judge, for the first time in a long while, felt a pang of humility. He had mocked someone based on appearance, and that judgment had been entirely wrong. The courtroom was silent for a moment, the weight of the moment settling over everyone present. The teenager's calm, articulate, and intelligent performance had left its mark. People exchanged glances, silently acknowledging that what they had just witnessed was unusual and remarkable. Even the judge, still seated high on the bench, found himself reassessing the young boy. There was no anger, no irritation, only a growing respect mixed with surprise. He had expected a simple, almost comical scene, and instead, he had encountered a challenge that was unexpectedly skilled, poised, and intelligent. As the teen stepped back slightly, collecting his papers and preparing to continue, there was a sense that the courtroom had shifted in tone. What had started as mockery and doubt had transformed into curiosity, respect, and a quiet admiration. The boy had not only defended himself but had begun to earn the attention of everyone in the room. People in the courtroom began to whisper again, this time not in amusement, but in awe. Some jurors exchanged looks of disbelief, while others smiled subtly, recognizing the talent and intelligence that the young boy had displayed. The judge, still adjusting to the unexpected turn of events, leaned back slightly, realizing that he had misjudged the situation entirely. The teenager, seemingly unaware of the full impact he had made, simply prepared to continue his argument. He remained composed, confident, and focused, ready to take the next step in presenting his case. The audience, once skeptical and mocking, now watched in quiet anticipation, eager to see what this remarkable young individual would do next. The tension in the room had shifted from ridicule to fascination, and everyone could sense that the next moments would be even more compelling, as the boy's abilities continued to unfold before their eyes. The courtroom, once filled with doubt and mockery, had become a stage where an unexpected talent was beginning to shine, capturing the attention and respect of all who were present. And so the teen prepared himself, calm and collected, ready to continue his journey in the courtroom, unaware of just how deeply he had already affected everyone around him. The courtroom had grown quiet after the teenager's initial presentation, the kind of quiet that carried curiosity, surprise, and a little disbelief all at once. Every eye in the room followed his movements carefully, no one wanting to miss a single word. The judge, still recovering from the unexpected brilliance of the young speaker, adjusted his robe and leaned forward slightly, as if trying to read a secret the boy was keeping. There was an invisible tension in the air, the kind that makes even seasoned observers hold their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. The teenager looked at the judge calmly, his gaze steady, showing no sign of intimidation. He took a moment to organize his papers once again, placing them carefully on the table, and then he began to speak, this time with a slightly more detailed approach. His words were still simple and clear, but now he was weaving in layers of insight that began to show the depth of his knowledge. He explained how the law applied to each fact in the case, breaking down complex ideas into understandable pieces without ever seeming forced or unnatural. The judge, initially skeptical, now listened more closely. He had heard confident speakers before, but there was a level of understanding and thoughtfulness in this teenager's approach that was difficult to dismiss. Every point made was supported with evidence, and every argument was structured in a way that left little room for counterpoints. It became clear that this was no ordinary young person standing before the bench. He had spent a great deal of time mastering the subject and preparing for this moment. As he continued, the teenager began to uncover inconsistencies that had gone unnoticed by others. He pointed out gaps in testimony and highlighted subtle contradictions in the statements of witnesses. What made his observations remarkable was the way he presented them, not as attacks but as logical questions that demanded careful consideration. It was a style that drew attention and respect, even from those who had been ready to dismiss him from the start. People in the courtroom began exchanging looks, quietly amazed by the depth of his understanding. The jury, often used to following the arguments of experienced attorneys, found themselves intrigued, leaning forward slightly in their seats, paying closer attention with every word. The clerk, the bailiff, and even other attorneys in the room found themselves stopping what they were doing to listen carefully. It was becoming increasingly clear that the teenager had a unique ability to communicate effectively and persuasively. Regardless of his youthful appearance, the judge, who had spent the first part of the proceedings projecting authority and sarcasm, began to adjust his approach. His interruptions became fewer, his comments more measured. He was starting to recognize that the boy was not only knowledgeable, but also strategic, anticipating challenges and addressing them before they could become an issue. The courtroom dynamics had shifted. Where mockery had once dominated, respect now quietly emerged. The teenager's argument unfolded methodically, step by step, demonstrating a remarkable balance between logic and empathy. He did not rely solely on legal knowledge. He also conveyed an understanding of the human elements of the case. He spoke about fairness, responsibility, and the impact of decisions on real lives, reminding everyone in the room that law was not just rules on paper but principles that shaped human experiences. The audience, often numb to lengthy legal arguments, felt the weight and sincerity of his words. There was a moment when he paused to address a particularly challenging aspect of the case. The opposing attorney, seasoned and experienced, had presented a complex point that even the judge had considered solid. The teenager listened carefully, nodding slightly, and then responded with clarity and precision, unraveling the argument step by step. He acknowledged the opposing side respectfully, while pointing out the logical flaws in their reasoning. His approach was calm, respectful, and highly effective. The judge's expression shifted again, moving from skepticism to quiet surprise. He was accustomed to being the smartest person in the room, but now he faced someone who could meet his intellect with both humility and confidence. The realization that he had underestimated this young individual created a subtle tension inside him. He could feel the court watching, waiting for his reaction, but he had to recalibrate his perspective. The boy was no longer just a teenager. He was a serious, competent mind, capable of challenging assumptions. As the teen moved to another part of his argument, he subtly displayed his ability to think on his feet. When minor interruptions occurred, he adapted without losing composure. He incorporated the questions and doubts presented into his reasoning, demonstrating flexibility and a remarkable understanding of courtroom dynamics. It was a performance that combined preparation, intelligence, and an innate sense of timing, all of which drew admiration even from the harshest critics. Outside the formal arguments, there were whispers throughout the room. Jury members exchanged glances of astonishment. The opposing counsel whispered quietly to their colleague, and some audience members could hardly contain their fascination. Even the court reporter, who had been trained to remain neutral and detached, found herself momentarily caught up in the unfolding drama, realizing that she was witnessing something rare, a young mind articulating complex legal concepts with such confidence and clarity. The teenager noticed the attention but did not let it sway him. He continued to present his points logically and methodically. His tone was neither boastful nor defensive. It was simply informative and persuasive. He made sure each point flowed naturally into the next, guiding the courtroom through the reasoning without overwhelming anyone. His ability to communicate complex ideas in a relatable and understandable way was extraordinary for someone his apparent age. As the discussion progressed, the teenager began to illustrate the practical consequences of each legal argument. He spoke about real people affected by decisions, connecting legal theory with human experience. This approach further captured the courtroom's attention, reminding everyone that law was not merely abstract, but deeply tied to life, fairness, and morality. The human element made his argument resonate, and even those who were initially skeptical started nodding in quiet agreement. The judge, now fully attentive, began to engage with the boy in a new way. He asked pointed questions, testing the teenager's knowledge and reasoning. Each question was met with calm and thoughtful responses, demonstrating a depth of understanding that was increasingly difficult to dismiss. The teenager's ability to respond logically and respectfully to each challenge impressed the courtroom and slowly dismantled the initial bias based on his age and appearance. By now, the courtroom had transformed. What started as mockery had turned into genuine curiosity, respect, and even a sense of wonder. The teenager had taken control of the narrative not through arrogance but through intelligence, preparation, and clear communication. People were starting to see him not as a boy, but as a capable and talented individual who deserved attention and respect. The teenager paused briefly, allowing the weight of his points to settle over the courtroom. His calm demeanor contrasted sharply with the energy of the room, and in that moment, it became evident that he had achieved something rare. He had shifted perception entirely, simply by being himself and presenting his arguments clearly and respectfully. The courtroom seemed to hold its breath, waiting for what would come next. The judge, quietly reflecting, acknowledged internally that he had misjudged the situation. The sarcasm that had marked the beginning of the proceedings had faded, replaced by contemplation and a measure of humility. He could not ignore the fact that the teenager had handled himself with a level of skill, composure, and insight that exceeded expectations. It was a turning point, both for the courtroom and for the perception of the boy before them. The teenager, sensing the room's shift, continued to explain his points further. He highlighted connections, clarified misunderstandings, and reinforced the logic of his position. Every word was deliberate, every argument carefully structured, and every statement presented with clarity and calm authority. It was an unfolding demonstration of intellect and character, one that captured the attention of everyone present and began to challenge the assumptions they had arrived with. The courtroom's atmosphere was now thick with anticipation. No one doubted the intelligence of the teenager. Instead, there was a growing recognition that he was extraordinary in his abilities. Observers could feel the shift from doubt to admiration, from mockery to respect, and even the judge could no longer maintain the initial dismissive stance. The boy's quiet confidence and clear reasoning had begun to command authority in its own right. As he concluded this segment of his argument, The teenager gathered his papers again, not with pride or arrogance, but with a quiet assurance. The audience, now fully engaged, watched intently, knowing that what they had witnessed so far was only the beginning. The courtroom had been transformed by a young mind challenging assumptions and displaying a remarkable blend of intelligence, composure, and human understanding. And as the teenager prepared to continue, the anticipation in the room suggested that the next moments would reveal even more of his talent and insight. The courtroom remained silent, the energy shifting from the initial skepticism to a heightened sense of attention and respect. Every eye followed the teenager, who stood quietly at the table, papers organized and ready. The judge, still adjusting to the unexpected depth of the young speaker, leaned slightly forward, his expression more contemplative than before. There was no room for mockery now. The teenager had claimed the room not with arrogance but with skill, patience, and a calm authority that drew everyone in. The teen began the next part of his argument, methodically addressing a section of the case that had been particularly confusing to the jury. He simplified the points without diminishing their importance, breaking down complex facts into clear, logical steps. Each statement built upon the previous one, creating a chain of reasoning that was easy to follow and hard to contest. The audience, including the judge, listened intently, recognizing the clarity of thought behind every word. He pointed out details that others had missed, small inconsistencies in witness statements and overlooked evidence that had not been properly considered. Each observation was presented calmly, never accusatory but always precise. It was this careful balance between detail and tone that made his argument not only understandable but persuasive. People in the courtroom began to nod quietly, some exchanging looks of surprise and approval, realizing the skill behind the teenager's approach. The judge, initially skeptical, began to interject less frequently, now asking questions to probe deeper into the teenager's reasoning. Each question, posed with a mix of curiosity and doubt, was met with a measured response. The teen had prepared well, but more importantly, he displayed an ability to think on his feet, adapting his arguments to address new angles without hesitation. It was clear that he was not only knowledgeable, but also experienced in navigating complex discussions. As he continued, he highlighted the human side of the case, emphasizing the real-world consequences of decisions and actions. He spoke of fairness and responsibility, demonstrating a deep understanding that law was not just rules and regulations, but a system that affected people's lives. His words were simple yet impactful, resonating with the jury and the audience alike. The courtroom, which had once been filled with subtle amusement at his appearance, now carried an atmosphere of respect and admiration. The opposing attorney, seasoned and confident, attempted to challenge the teen's points, presenting complex legal reasoning in an effort to regain control. The teenager listened attentively, nodding slightly to acknowledge the counter-arguments, and then addressed each point with calm, logical explanations. He never raised his voice or showed frustration. Instead, he dismantled the opposing arguments step by step, making each point clear and understandable. The courtroom watched in fascination as he turned what could have been a tense confrontation into a display of intellect and composure. People in the audience whispered quietly among themselves, marveling at the teenager's ability to handle pressure and articulate his reasoning so effectively. The jury members leaned forward, captivated by the clarity and precision of his explanations. Even the court staff, usually detached and neutral, were drawn into the unfolding drama, recognizing that they were witnessing something rare, a young individual commanding attention and respect through intellect alone. The judge, now fully attentive, acknowledged the depth of the teenager's preparation and the skill in his presentation. He asked more detailed questions, probing specific aspects of the case that required nuanced understanding. The teenager responded with confidence and clarity, demonstrating a grasp of both the facts and the broader implications of the law. Each answer reinforced his credibility and further shifted the courtroom's perception from doubt to recognition of his talent. As the teen moved through the case, he skillfully addressed multiple perspectives, showing empathy for all parties involved. He balanced factual analysis with moral reasoning, explaining how each decision could impact real people. This human-centric approach drew admiration from the jury and softened the critical stance of the judge and the opposing counsel. The teenager's ability to combine technical knowledge with human understanding was becoming increasingly apparent and compelling. The judge, who had begun the proceedings with sarcasm, now found himself challenged in ways he had not anticipated. He had to reconsider his assumptions about age and appearance, realizing that he had underestimated the teenager's capabilities. Each logical, respectful, and articulate response the boy delivered chipped away at the initial biases, forcing the judge to engage seriously and thoughtfully. The courtroom had become a space where skill and intelligence, rather than appearances, dictated respect and attention. At one point, the teenager paused to address a particularly complex piece of evidence. The opposing attorney had presented it as a pivotal element in their favor, but the teenager carefully explained why it should be interpreted differently, citing legal principles and past precedents. His reasoning was clear, and he articulated it in a way that made it accessible to everyone in the courtroom. The judge nodded subtly, impressed by the thoroughness and clarity of the argument, while the jury listened intently, absorbing every detail. The courtroom's energy shifted further as the teenager continued to explain the implications of each point. His calm demeanor, combined with insightful analysis, made it difficult for anyone to dismiss his arguments. He demonstrated an extraordinary ability to think several steps ahead, anticipating questions and addressing them before they could arise. This foresight reinforced his credibility and left the courtroom quietly acknowledging his capabilities. As he approached the most critical part of his argument, the teenager connected the legal points to broader ethical considerations. He spoke of justice, fairness, and responsibility, reminding the audience that the law served people, not the other way around. This perspective resonated deeply, eliciting nods of agreement and thoughtful expressions from the jury, the audience, and even the judge. The teenager's words were simple but powerful, carrying a weight that went beyond the facts alone. The opposing attorney tried to regain momentum, presenting a series of complex legal arguments, but the teenager responded with patience and clarity. He broke down each point methodically, highlighting logical flaws and inconsistencies without being confrontational. The courtroom watched as he maintained composure under pressure, demonstrating a mastery of both legal reasoning and human interaction. His performance was not just about knowledge. It was about confidence, strategy, and respect. People in the audience were now fully engaged. Whispers of admiration spread quietly, and the jury members exchanged looks of astonishment. Even the court staff, who were trained to remain neutral, found themselves drawn into the unfolding events. The teenager had transformed the courtroom from a space of skepticism and amusement to one of attention, respect, and anticipation. Every word he spoke reinforced the realization that he was extraordinary, far beyond what anyone had expected based on his appearance. The judge, who had started the day with doubts and sarcasm, now listened with a mix of curiosity and respect. He posed challenging questions, testing the teenager's depth of understanding, and each time the boy responded with calm precision. The courtroom was witnessing a remarkable display of intelligence, composure, and strategic thinking, and the judge could not ignore the skill in front of him. The teenager was no longer just a young observer. He had become a formidable presence in the room. As the teen moved towards concluding this segment of his argument, he summarized the key points with clarity and emphasis. Each statement reinforced his reasoning and left little room for doubt. The audience, the jury, and the judge were all engaged, fully aware that they were witnessing something exceptional. The teenager's calm confidence, combined with meticulous preparation and thoughtful presentation, had transformed the proceedings. The courtroom had shifted entirely. Where mockery and doubt had once dominated, now there was respect and acknowledgement. The teenager had demonstrated that age and appearance were not indicators of ability or understanding. His clear reasoning, human empathy, and strategic communication had earned him attention and admiration from everyone present. As the teenager stepped back slightly, gathering his papers and preparing for the next stage, there was a quiet anticipation in the room. Everyone recognized that the next moments would be critical, as the boy had established himself as a skilled and thoughtful presence in the courtroom. The energy was no longer about judgment or doubt. It was about recognition, curiosity, and the anticipation of what this remarkable young individual would do next. The judge, fully attentive now, reflected on the transformation he had witnessed. He realized that his assumptions had been wrong, and that he had underestimated the teenager's abilities. The courtroom, once filled with whispers of amusement, was now captivated by a combination of intellect, composure, and human insight. The teen had turned the proceedings into a compelling display of skill and understanding, leaving a lasting impression on everyone present. The teenager, unaware of the full impact he had made, prepared to continue, calm and confident. The audience, the jury, and the judge all sensed that they were about to witness further demonstration of talent, reasoning, and character. The courtroom had been transformed, and the anticipation for what came next was palpable. The teen's journey was far from over, and the stage was set for an even more remarkable revelation of his abilities. The atmosphere in the courtroom had transformed completely. The initial amusement and skepticism had faded, replaced by a mixture of anticipation, respect, and curiosity. Every person in the room was now fully engaged, eyes fixed on the teenager standing confidently at the table. He had established a presence that commanded attention, not through intimidation or loud speech, but through calm, logical reasoning and an unwavering sense of purpose. The judge, who had started the day mocking the boy's appearance, now leaned forward with a thoughtful expression. There was no trace of sarcasm in his voice anymore, only cautious curiosity. He began to ask more complex questions, ones that tested not just knowledge of the law but understanding of how it applied in nuanced situations. The teenager listened carefully, nodding slightly, then responded with clarity and precision that left no doubt about his capabilities. It was at this moment that the teenager decided to reveal a detail that would astonish the courtroom. He paused, looked around at the attentive audience, and then spoke clearly. "Your Honor, I believe it is important to clarify something before continuing. While I may appear to be a teenager, I am in fact a licensed attorney. I have chosen to present myself this way to challenge assumptions and to show that appearances can be deceiving." A wave of shock rippled through the courtroom. The judge's eyebrows shot up, his mouth opening slightly in surprise. Members of the jury whispered among themselves, eyes wide, struggling to process the revelation. Even the opposing counsel froze for a moment, caught off guard by the unexpected twist. The teenager remained calm, letting the statement sink in without any need for further explanation. The courtroom was silent for several moments, the weight of the revelation settling over everyone. The judge, who had spent the first part of the day dismissing the boy, now had to confront the reality that he had been completely wrong. The young attorney had not only held his ground but had outperformed expectations in every way. The realization was humbling, and it required the judge to pause and reflect. Slowly the judge nodded, a small smile forming as he acknowledged the boy's courage and skill. "I must admit," he said, his voice steady, "this is not something I expected. You have demonstrated remarkable understanding, skill, and composure. I apologize for underestimating you based on your appearance." The teenager accepted the acknowledgement with quiet grace. He did not boast or seek revenge for the earlier mockery. Instead, he focused on continuing his argument, using the revelation not as a weapon, but as a clarification that strengthened his credibility. His humility, combined with undeniable skill, made him all the more compelling. As the case continued, the young attorney seamlessly integrated his legal knowledge with practical reasoning. He dissected each argument carefully, presenting evidence with clarity and connecting the dots in ways that were easy to follow yet deeply insightful. The courtroom, already captivated, now viewed him with genuine admiration. It was clear that his approach was not only effective but also inspiring to those who had been quick to judge him at first glance. The judge, now fully engaged and respectful, asked pointed questions about certain legal precedents. The teenager responded with precise references, explaining how each precedent applied to the case and why it was relevant. His explanations were clear, logical, and thorough, leaving little room for counter-arguments. The audience watched in awe, realizing that the young attorney had mastered both the theory and practical application of the law at an extraordinary level. Throughout the proceedings, the teenager maintained a human-centric approach. He emphasized fairness, responsibility, and the impact of decisions on real people. This perspective resonated deeply with the jury, who began to appreciate not only the logical rigor of his arguments, but also the ethical and empathetic foundation behind them. The courtroom atmosphere was now one of mutual respect and attentive engagement. The opposing counsel, recognizing the unique situation, attempted to challenge the teenager with aggressive questioning. However, the young attorney handled each challenge calmly and respectfully. He addressed each point logically, acknowledging the strengths of the opposing arguments while demonstrating why his reasoning was sound. This balance of respect and authority further enhanced his credibility and drew admiration from everyone in the courtroom. The teen also highlighted the broader implications of the case. He explained how legal decisions could influence future scenarios, shaping the way similar cases might be handled. By connecting the specifics of the case to larger principles of justice, he demonstrated foresight and strategic thinking that impressed even the most experienced members of the legal community present in the courtroom. As the arguments progressed, the teenager continued to uncover subtle inconsistencies and overlooked evidence, presenting each observation methodically and persuasively. His ability to spot critical details and incorporate them into his reasoning revealed a level of expertise rarely seen in attorneys, let alone someone who appeared to be a teenager. The courtroom audience, now fully engaged, followed every word, understanding that they were witnessing an exceptional display of skill and intellect. The judge, visibly impressed, began to adjust his interactions. Where he had once interrupted with sarcasm, he now posed thoughtful questions, genuinely curious about the young attorney's perspective. Each response was met with attentive listening, and the courtroom as a whole seemed to absorb the gravity of the moment. It was no longer about appearances or assumptions. It was about talent, preparation, and integrity. At a key point in the proceedings, the teenager presented a particularly compelling argument that synthesized all the evidence, legal references, and ethical considerations. He spoke clearly and calmly, guiding the courtroom through the reasoning in a step-by-step manner. Each point built upon the last, culminating in a conclusion that was both logical and persuasive. The effect was profound. The audience and jury members leaned in, recognizing the clarity and strength of the argument. The opposing counsel, though experienced and confident, found it increasingly difficult to counter the points made by the teenager. Each attempt was met with careful, reasoned responses that addressed the arguments directly, while maintaining composure and respect. The courtroom had shifted from initial skepticism to genuine respect, and even the judge could not hide his admiration for the young attorney's performance. The teen's calm and thoughtful demeanor, combined with his remarkable legal knowledge, had transformed the courtroom atmosphere. Where mockery and doubt had once existed, there was now focus, attention, and appreciation for his skill. The audience recognized that appearances had been misleading, and the teenager's performance had provided a powerful lesson in humility, capability, and the importance of judging people by their abilities rather than their looks. As the day progressed, the teenager continued to present evidence, answer questions, and respond to challenges with unwavering composure. His approach remained grounded in clarity, respect, and logical reasoning, creating a sense of authority that was natural rather than forced. The courtroom, now fully attentive, followed each step of his argument, understanding that they were witnessing something rare and extraordinary. By the time he paused to collect his thoughts, the audience was deeply engaged and the judge fully respectful. The young attorney had not only defended his points effectively, but had also established himself as a figure of intellect, maturity, and human empathy. The courtroom had been transformed by his presence, and the anticipation for the next stage of the case was palpable. Everyone present knew that they had witnessed a remarkable demonstration of skill and character, one that would leave a lasting impression on all who had been there to see it unfold. The courtroom had reached a moment of anticipation that could almost be felt in the air. The young attorney, still standing at the table, had completed the bulk of his arguments, leaving only the final moments to demonstrate the full weight of his case. Every person in the room was fully attentive, their previous assumptions long forgotten, replaced by respect and admiration for the teenager, who had so skillfully commanded the proceedings. The judge, who had initially been dismissive, now leaned forward with a mixture of curiosity and acknowledgement. He posed questions to clarify certain points, and the teenager responded with precision and calm authority, demonstrating that his earlier revelations about being a licensed attorney were no exaggeration. Every word, every gesture reflected preparation, intelligence, and composure far beyond what anyone had expected from someone of his appearance. The teenager moved through the remaining points methodically, addressing minor objections and integrating legal precedents with practical reasoning. His calm tone and logical explanations held the attention of the entire courtroom. Even the opposing counsel, seasoned and confident, found it difficult to interrupt or challenge him without sounding dismissive or unfair. The teenager's presence had subtly shifted the dynamics of the room, creating a level playing field where skill and intellect, not age or appearance, determined influence. As he spoke, he reminded the courtroom of the human element of the case. He highlighted how decisions affected real lives, emphasizing fairness and responsibility alongside legal correctness. This approach resonated deeply with the jury, making them consider not only the legal implications, but also the ethical and human aspects of the case. His arguments were grounded in reality, showing an understanding of law as a living, human-centered system rather than an abstract set of rules. At one point, he addressed a particularly complicated piece of evidence that had caused confusion earlier in the proceedings. With calm, logical reasoning, he explained its relevance, pointing out overlooked details and demonstrating how it fit into the broader narrative. The courtroom watched in awe, recognizing the skill and insight it took to interpret complex information so clearly. Even the judge nodded slightly, impressed by the clarity and thoughtfulness of the explanation. The audience, previously skeptical, now leaned forward in their seats, fully engaged. They whispered quietly, exchanging looks of astonishment and admiration. It was evident to everyone that the teenager had achieved something remarkable. He had not only defended his points effectively, but had also shifted the perceptions of everyone present. Respect replaced doubt and curiosity replaced mockery. The young attorney continued, carefully summarizing the key points of the case. He reinforced the logical structure of his arguments, revisited critical evidence, and highlighted the connections between facts, law, and ethical considerations. His ability to synthesize complex information into a coherent and compelling presentation left the courtroom captivated. Each step of his reasoning was clear, deliberate, and persuasive, reinforcing his credibility and the respect he had earned. The judge, now fully engaged and attentive, began to ask more reflective questions, probing deeper into the ethical and legal implications of the case. The teenager responded with clarity and composure, showing not only mastery of the law but also a nuanced understanding of human behavior and fairness. His answers were thoughtful and insightful, leaving little room for doubt and demonstrating an exceptional balance between intellect and empathy. The opposing counsel, acknowledging the teenager's remarkable skill, attempted one final set of challenges, hoping to regain control. The young attorney met each challenge with calm authority, systematically addressing each point, explaining any discrepancies, and reinforcing the overall strength of his argument. The courtroom watched as the teen's composure and clarity made even the most complex issues accessible and understandable. It was a rare display of talent, focus, and presence that commanded attention without the need for arrogance. Throughout the final stages, the teenager remained humble and respectful, never letting his abilities or the recognition he was receiving lead to pride or overconfidence. He focused entirely on the case, on justice, and on clear communication. This humility, combined with extraordinary skill, made him all the more compelling to the jury, the judge, and the audience. People recognized that they were witnessing something exceptional, a young mind demonstrating the full range of intelligence, preparation, and moral awareness. As the teen drew closer to the conclusion of his arguments, he began to tie together all the threads of the case. He connected the evidence, the legal precedents, and the human impact, presenting a coherent, compelling, and persuasive conclusion. Every person in the courtroom listened intently, understanding that these final points would leave a lasting impression. The room was charged with focus, anticipation, and quiet admiration. The judge, who had once dismissed him, now looked on with respect and acknowledgement. He posed a final question, inviting the teenager to offer his overall perspective on the case. The young attorney responded thoughtfully, emphasizing fairness, accountability, and the importance of considering both facts and human impact. His response was measured, clear, and persuasive, leaving no doubt about the depth of his understanding or the integrity of his reasoning. The jury, captivated from start to finish, absorbed the conclusion of the argument with renewed appreciation for the teenager's skills. They exchanged quiet glances, recognizing the extraordinary talent and thoughtfulness displayed. The audience, too, reflected on their initial assumptions, now fully aware that appearances can be misleading and that skill, intellect, and integrity are not determined by age. The judge, visibly impressed, acknowledged the remarkable performance. He praised the young attorney's clarity, preparation, and respectful demeanor, highlighting how the presentation had transformed the proceedings. He noted the courage it took to present oneself in such an unexpected way, and the skill required to command the courtroom without arrogance or disrespect. The courtroom atmosphere, once tense and skeptical, had been transformed into one of respect, reflection, and acknowledgement of talent. The teenager, having completed his final points, gathered his papers with calm composure. He did not seek applause or recognition, but the courtroom could not help but acknowledge the extraordinary performance they had just witnessed. People whispered among themselves, expressing amazement at the clarity, insight, and poise of the young attorney. Even the opposing counsel, recognizing the skill and composure, offered a subtle nod of respect. As the proceedings drew to a close, the courtroom reflected on the lessons of the day. The teenager had not only defended his case successfully, but had also demonstrated that assumptions based on appearance can be misleading. He had shown that preparation, skill, and integrity are what truly command respect and attention. The judge and all present had been reminded of the importance of judging people by their abilities, not by their looks. After the session ended, the courtroom emptied slowly. People discussed quietly among themselves, still reflecting on the unexpected events. The teenager left the room with quiet confidence, aware of the impression he had made but focused on the larger principles of justice and fairness. The story of his remarkable performance spread quickly, leaving a lasting impression on those who had witnessed it. The judge, now alone in the courtroom, reflected on his own assumptions and biases. He realized that he had learned a valuable lesson about humility, perception, and the importance of keeping an open mind. The young attorney's performance had not only influenced the outcome of the case but had also left a deep impact on everyone present, reminding them that talent and integrity often lie beneath the surface, waiting to be recognized. The day ended with a sense of respect, reflection, and inspiration. The teenager had shown that skill, preparation, and moral awareness can overcome doubt, prejudice, and skepticism. He had not only demonstrated his legal abilities, but had also reminded everyone of the human values that underpin the practice of law. The courtroom had witnessed an extraordinary display of intellect, composure, and empathy, leaving a lasting mark on all who were present. The young attorney's journey, his talent, and his courage had made a profound impact, proving that appearances are never a true measure of capability.